Hello folks, for the last couple of years my first video of the year has been to run through the World of Warcraft roadmap and speculate about what's coming in the new year. It's fair to say that I have been wrong more often than I have been right, but you know what, I do enjoy speculating about where the game is going, and it's fun, right? Sadly, at least as I upload this video, there's no sign of a 2026 roadmap. And given that we didn't get any mid-year updates for the 2025 roadmap, I have a very strong suspicion that despite its success, the World of Warcraft team have decided to drop the whole idea. For my preview, I am going to be working on the assumption that the World of Warcraft release cadence will remain the same. Anyways, let's get on to the fun stuff and start with what we already know. Now, before I go any further in this video, while it is mainly speculation, I will be making occasional references to early Midnight Story content from the beta, albeit I am going to try to keep that as vague as I can to minimise any spoilers. The pre-patch for Midnight, of course, will be releasing on January the 20th. This will include major class overhauls, a stat squish, the dreaded add-on Lockdown, a brand new transmog system, and the new PvP training grounds. Just 1 week later, on the 27th, and we'll be getting the pre-patch event, which will be set in the Twilight Highlands, along with the return of the Winds of Mysterious Wisdom leveling XP buff. Early access for the expansion itself will be either on February the 26th or the 27th. I'm personally predicting the 26th, as that will avoid the dev team having to release a major expansion on a Friday afternoon and risking a very rough weekend for themselves. And for those of you who don't buy the Epic Edition, delayed access, and yes, I am going to call it that because that is what it is, will be on the 2nd of March. For the raid, along with Mythic Plus, we'll have to wait another couple of weeks through to March the 17th. When the Void Spire and Dreamrift raids open, and for the third raid, March and Quell Danas, we'll have to wait until the 31st of March. Of course, all of that really isn't news at this point, but as always, we don't really know very much at all about what will be following on from the first season opener, which means it is now time to start dropping into that juicy speculation. The first 0.5 minor patches of the last two expansions have been pretty varied. Dragonflight got the trading post along with an open world event, and the War Within was all about World of Warcraft's 20th anniversary, which really doesn't help us to guess what it could be this time around. But as it happens, I do have a bit of an idea. Back in the autumn at a panel event in PAX East, as well as soft announcing Legion Remix, the developers also revealed that they are working on a new game mode event with a spooky theme, including a screenshot of Darkshire. I think that most of us who saw that preview assumed that it would end up being a War Within feature, but that of course has turned out not to be the case. Now, I suspect that it was originally intended to be in the War Within, but had to be pushed back for some reason. Now, with the team's focus having been on getting Midnight out of the door, realistically, the early patch content pretty much has to be already done, or at least almost done, well in advance. And this event seems to me to be an ideal candidate for that first minor patch. Along with that, many of the minor patches have been including some holiday revamps. Now, this patch will likely be releasing in late April or maybe early May, just before Children's Week. But as Children's Week did get a revamp last year, I don't think that it's a very likely candidate for any more work. So instead, I'm predicting that the Midsummer Fire Festival will be getting a revamp. Moving on now to the second patch, 12.0.7, both of the last two 0.7 patches saw the release of brand new mini zones, Forbidden Reach in Dragonflight and Siren's Isle in the War Within. Now, both of those zones had one thing in common, and that was that the zones already existed in the game files. Forbidden Reach, of course, was the Drakthir starting zone, and Siren's Isle was a previously unused Battle for Azeroth Island Expedition map. Now, if we're looking for a zone that's already in the game files, it turns out there is a possible candidate. Taking a look at the new Zulaman zone map reveals that there's a large landmass just off the eastern coast. Now try to fly out there and it turns out that this landmass actually does exist in-game, albeit you get very quickly ported away from it, so the developers clearly don't want us to be exploring it just yet. Now by far the most common community conclusion about this area is that it's going to be the patch 12.10 zone, and that for sure is a distinct possibility, especially as there are some other tentative hints that there could be another raid in this area. That said, while Blizzard have leaked future patch zones in the game files in the past, they have almost never been quite this overt about a major patch zone. And on top of that, I personally feel that having the first major patch zone be essentially a second troll zone could end up feeling a bit samey. On the other hand, as a minor patch zone, I could see this being an excellent candidate. Now, assuming that we do get those 2 minor patches, I would expect this second one to be dropping sometime around mid to late June. But if that mystery news zone does turn out to be for patch 12.07, that does raise the question of where we're going to be going for patch 12.10, as that will still be very much up for grabs. And I do have a bit of a tinfoil hat theory. In the Midnight Reveal cinematic, we see Xal'atath launch a full-scale assault on the Sunwell, a major font of arcane and holy power in Azeroth, almost certainly with the goal of capturing it for her own uses. That attack is thwarted, in part due to the Sunwell's power being used to lash out at the assault, and it culminates with Xal'atath's giant void portal in the sky being not so much closed, but entirely blocked by a giant death beam of light emanating from the Sunwell. Now, assuming that Xal'atath really does need to get her hands on one of Azeroth's great fonts of power, this leaves her with just 2 options. Attempt a second attack on a Silver Moon, which is now protected by the massed forces of both Horde and Alliance, along with a very riled up Sunwell Death Beam weapon, or find an alternative source of power. And if you know your lore, you will know that such a thing already exists on Azeroth. But before we go there, there is another narrative thread of note. In the Midnight prequel book Blood Tiles, we see Arathor, Turalyon and Illyria thwart a major attack in Suramar by none other than the demons of the Burning Legion, this time led by an Eredar lord called Sarathar. During the book, we learn that Sarathar's original role in the Legion was to infiltrate target worlds, gather intelligence on their weaknesses, and also to prepare the way for a Legion assault. Now that probably does sound a little bit familiar to you all. In patch 11.20, we discovered that Xal'atath was originally the harbinger of the Void Lord Dimensius, a role which very likely saw her infiltrate target worlds, and well, you get the idea. Staying with the book though, Sarathar, it seems, has decided to jump into the power vacuum left by the defeat of Sargeras, Kil'jaeden and Archimonde, and lead at least a part of the Legion's forces to new ends, which seemingly involve attacking Azeroth. Of course, in the book, Sarathar is defeated, and indeed is seemingly destroyed. But here's the thing, not only is there no body left behind, but Sarathar is actually seemingly defeated and destroyed with no body left behind, not once, but twice in that book. And yet, I think we all know what happens when a defeated enemy leaves no remains behind to check for a pulse. Anyways, getting back to that other font of arcane power. Back in the War of the Ancients, the original Well of Eternity, Azeroth's very first font of arcane power was destroyed, but not before none other than Illidan Stormrage stole some vials of that well's waters. He used those vials to create a brand new well, in a turn of events which resulted in the planting of a new World Tree Nordrassil over the well in order to contain its energies. Just as with the original Well of Eternity, this well at the heart of Mount Hyjal has been the target of the Burning Legion, with attacks during both Warcraft 3 and the Legion expansion. I think you've probably already guessed by now where I'm going with all of this. Unable to get to the Sunwell, Xal'atath will decide to head to Hyjal instead, recruiting Sarathar and his demons, as they, as it happens, also have some plans for it. Thankfully, the roots of Nordrassil, along with the other world trees, reach down into the realm of Harendir, another of the new Midnight Zones, and the Harendir are able to alert us to the looming threat, leading us to a revamped Mount Hyjal, now recovering from the effects of the Molten Front and Cataclysm. Now, if that seems a little bit far-fetched, there is actually another reason to think that we could end up in Kalimdor in Midnight. Back in BlizzCon 2023, when the World Soul Saga was revealed, Chris Metzen spoke about a reunification of all of the Elvish nations. Now, having the Night Elves joining the Alliance forces in Silvermoon is probably a good start, but it's fair to say that Lothamar and the Blood Elves' rather grudging acceptance of the Alliance presence isn't exactly a reunification. And I think that the Night Elves are going to need a lot more than that if they are to ever join a new Kingdom of Quel'The the Last, such as, perhaps, the Void Elves being at the vanguard of a defence of the Night Elf lands. Now, as to timing, I would expect that particular patch to drop around mid-August, and that will leave us with just enough time to fit the mid-season patches in before the end of the year. And what can we expect for those mid-season patches? Well, with Blizzard having picked up the pace for time walking in the War Within, I'm expecting Dragonflight time walking. Yes, really. But this time, hopefully along with a new time walking raid, the most likely being Throne of Thunder from Mists of Pandaria. And seriously, it is way past time for us to get a mop time walking raid. Beyond that, and I'm also going to predict some kind of new non-seasonal PvP event. With the launch of Midnight, we're getting both the new Training Grounds feature, but also the first significant dedicated open world PvP area since Warlords of Draenor's Ashran. And this does make me think that the World of Warcraft dev team have decided to have a much bigger swing at revitalizing casual and world PvP in the Midnight expansion. And in an expansion which is already leading into revamping new zones, a revamped PvP focused zone seems a somewhat likely candidate. As to what that zone would be, my bet is going to be for Nazjatar. Now, of course, the original Nazjatar zone was a PvE zone, but it was also, in my view, when World of Warcraft's War Mode open world PvP peaked. The design of that zone, with the Horde and Alliance bases being close together with a fairly narrow roadway between them, led to some of the most exciting open world PvP battles that I've ever encountered in World of Warcraft. But what about World of Warcraft's story? Well, these minor patches is also where I'm going to predict that the light in the person of the Naru will be making a fresh appearance. Back in the Midnight Cinematic, we see Liadrin pray to the light for aid, and while the forces that ultimately arrive are essentially just the Alliance and the Horde, one doesn't just walk through the Sunwell without something else being at play. And that something else, along with the source of that death beam that closes Xal'atath's Void Portal, I suspect is going to turn out to be some exterior forces of the light, going back as far as Legion, and there have been some major hints planted into the game that the light is not necessarily automatically good, especially when being good gets in the way of its objectives. And this is being reiterated in the Midnight prequel book Blood Ties, where Turalyon gets a little bit caught up in the powers of the light for his own good. And if that is not enough, in-game we're going to be meeting a band of Draenei refugees who got separated from Velen's Exodar Draenei even before they reached the planet of Draenor. And one of those refugees absolutely does not consider the Naru to be very trustworthy. Now, timing-wise, if we do get two minor patches, we would see them dropping around mid-October and early December, meaning that this would wrap us up for 2026, with the next major patch, 12.20, likely dropping around early February 2027. Now, normally that's where I would wrap up for a 2026 review, but given that we are starting the review with Midnight's launch, I thought that we could keep going right through to the end of the expansion. So where is Midnight going to end? Well, in terms of location, I noticed something very interesting about the Void Storm zone. Travel to the edges of that zone, and it's very clear that the landmass doesn't stop there. Void Storm is part of a much larger area, an area that if you try to access it, very large and very scary NPCs drop down out of nowhere to make sure that you don't survive for very long. Now, I am reluctant to call this landmass a planet, as it is more of a void realm than a place in the dark beyond, but even so, it does appear to be planet-sized. So my own bet is that for patch 12.0, we will be returning to the Void Storm and to another brand new zone adjacent to the zone that we visit at the start of the expansion. And this will be the one that will turn out to be the seat of Xal'atath's power, as we finally face off against her. Now, facing off against Xal'atath in the final Raid of Midnight does not necessarily mean that this will be where she meets her doom. It would not be the first time that we have defeated a World of Warcraft big bad, only for it to return later on. Just look at Ragnaros or Kelth's Sunstrider, to name just two. But whatever it is, we won't be facing off against her alone, as whatever additional forces the Lights Naru have at their behest will be at our sides. And that, of course, will leave us with the final minor patches of Midnight. Gameplay-wise, your guess is honestly as good as mine that far out. But I have been seeing a little bit more speculation about a Wrath of the Lich King remix of late. Now, I'm personally not convinced that Wrath has enough content to pull a remix off, but I of course could be wrong. But story-wise, I do think that this is the time that we'll likely start to see the setup for the Last Titan expansion. We already know that in the Last Titans, we'll be returning to Northrend and to Ulja, where we will encounter the Titans, and something is going to trigger their appearance. And that something could very well be the heroes rejecting whatever it is that the powers of the light will be asking of us in return for facing off against Xal'atath at our sides. Assuming Blizzard stick to the lightly planned 18-month patch release, believe it or not, we'll be seeing all of that play out in the first half of 2027, with a mid to late August release being very likely for the Last Titan. Anyways, that's my own personal speculation on where Midnight will be going. I'd be really interested to hear all of your thoughts as well. Maybe instead of Hydro, Midnight is just going to turn out to be a troll expansion. Comment down below. If you found this style of video helpful, entertaining, and even just plain annoying, then let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support my channel to grow and help me to make more of these videos along with other content, then hit that subscribe button right now before you forget. If you don't want to miss out whenever I release a new video, then as well as subscribing, you can follow me in social media for updates. My links in the description below as well. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.